There's a point in personal development where the mind begins to understand itself not as a collection of reactions, but as a system that can be organized, a system that can move information, a system that can process a truth through more than one layer of intelligence. You're stepping into that point now. Most people think their inner world is a single voice, a single impulse, a single truth that arrives fully formed. But the more accurately you look, the clearer it becomes that the self isn't one thing speaking. It's multiple intelligences interacting. There's a part of you that senses first, the part that understands second, the part that expresses last. And the difference between reactivity and self-leadership is whether those intelligences ever learn to operate as one continuous movement instead of three separate events. The bridge that you're creating is that movement. A movement where instinct doesn't compete with meaning, where meaning doesn't dilute instinct, where expression isn't a performance but a natural result of clarity traveling its full pathway. Think of this bridge as your internal infrastructure, not a metaphor, a literal shift in the way that your system handles truth. Most people collapse all three layers into one moment. They feel something and they speak from the feeling without passing it through understanding. Their entire inner world is wired horizontally instead of vertically. A straight, flat line, no depth, no translation, no refinement. You're beginning to develop vertically. This is what allows your instinct to rise instead of erupt. It allows your meaning to form instead of distort. Allows your voice to articulate instead of react. The bridge isn't about controlling yourself, it's about sequencing yourself. When your system discovers a new sequence, your identity quietly evolves around it. You start to see that the first signal inside you is not the final truth, but the beginning of a longer, more intelligent process. This internal bridge isn't a spiritual concept, it's a functional one. It changes how information moves in your body. It alters how you interpret experience. It shifts the entire architecture of your expression. This is why the visual matters. It's not artwork, it's a neurological cue. A way for your mind to remember that clarity is not a moment, clarity is a movement. A movement from sensation to meaning to expression, in that order. And once your system learns this pathway, your communication changes, your boundaries change, your emotional interpretations change, your leadership changes, your sense of self changes. Because you've finally given your inner world a structure that can hold truth instead of being overwhelmed by it. Truth becomes usable when it travels through the right sequence. That's what this bridge represents. It's not perfection or mastery, it's just the beginning of internal order. And internal order is where personal power begins. And what people don't often realize is that personal power doesn't grow because you feel stronger. It grows because you stop negotiating with what weakens you. Real power rises the moment you believe you don't have to keep honoring the terms that your old self agreed to. You know those terms, the ones like stay quiet, stay small, stay agreeable, stay fast enough to avoid rejection, stay soft enough to avoid conflict. Stay predictable enough to not inconvenience anyone with the truth of who you actually are. But power is born when you no longer consent to that contract. Not dramatically or loudly, but internally. with the quiet clarity that says, I'm not performing this version of myself anymore. Power is not bravado or dominance. It's not volume. Power is the ability to hold your own truth without collapsing or shrinking or apologizing for it. And when that shift happens, the world around you has no choice but to recalibrate. People who relied on your old pattern won't know how to categorize you now. Dynamics that survived on silence won't survive your clarity. Situations that fed on your self-abandonment will lose their leverage. Because you aren't playing the role. You're not carrying that script. You're not bending your voice to match the expectations of other people who never learned to hold their own truth. This is the moment when you stop asking, how do I get stronger? And you start asking, what am I still giving my strength away to? Look at your life through that lens and you'll see the architecture instantly. Every time you explained yourself endlessly to gain understanding you never owed, you gave away strength. Every time you lowered your standard to keep a connection intact, you gave away strength. Every time you stayed silent instead of naming what was real for you, you gave away strength. Not because you were weak, but because you were trained to believe that truth was a liability. Now imagine a life where your truth is the baseline instead of the threat. That's the shift into real power, not ego-driven power, not performance-driven power, not look how healed I am power, but the kind of power that comes from knowing you're allowed to take yourself seriously. When you take yourself seriously, your life reorganizes itself around you instead of around your wounds. Your voice stops negotiating its volume. Your boundaries stop asking for permission. Your instincts stop apologizing for being accurate. This level of power doesn't make you rigid, it makes you precise. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you honest. It doesn't make you intimidating, it makes you undeniable. The moment you stop performing the version of you that made other people comfortable, your actual life starts. Not the life you managed, not the life you tolerated, not the life you inherited, the life that only becomes available when your truth becomes your organizing principle. When you build internal power, you stop seeking external permission. You stop needing validation to verify your instincts. You stop abandoning yourself in moments that require you most. You become someone who can stand in a room and not lose yourself in the atmosphere. Someone who can speak in a moment of tension and not dilute the message. Someone who can make decisions that honor who you're becoming, not who you used to be afraid of disappointing. You become the reference point, not the echo. And once you become your own reference point, your life becomes radically simpler. Not easier, but simpler. Because when your truth leads, everything that doesn't align naturally falls away without the constant emotional negotiation. That's the kind of power that you can build a life on. The kind of power that no one can take from you. The kind of power that stays even when the room shifts, even when people misunderstand you, even when fear rises. This is the power that belongs to someone who has stopped performing their past and started honoring their evolution. You'll start to feel what it means to finally operate from a center that doesn't wobble every time the world moves. That's not confidence, that's orientation. And once your orientation changes, your entire reality has to follow.